Our first scripture comes to us from the prophet Isaiah. These words will probably sound familiar to you. Isaiah says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God." The word of the Lord. And then finally, the Gospel of Luke. It seems like we have been in Luke for a very long time. We have followed him from the beginning of Jesus' ministry in chapter 4 on Memorial Day weekend to now we are at the chapter before he goes to Jerusalem, coming to the end of our time with Luke, chapter 18. Then Jesus took the 12 aside and said to them, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and insulted and spat upon. After they have flogged him, they will kill him, and on the third day he will rise again." But the disciples understood nothing about all these things. In fact, what he said was hidden from them, and they did not grasp what was said. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard a crowd going by, he asked what was happening, and they told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." Then the man shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And those who were in front sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he shouted even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stood still and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The man said, "Lord, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has saved you." Immediately the man regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, praised God. The word of the Lord. Please do not later tell me that I was all alone in this in my childhood, because from my experience, many children go through a phase when they want to walk everywhere with their eyes closed. Does every child go through that phase where they think, "Oh, I can just go through the world blind"? Okay, you tell me later that I was the only child who did this, because this was a very strong phase in my life. For several years of my youth, I loved nothing more than to stand at a spot in my house. I would change it up with each new experiment. Stand at a spot in my house, shut my eyes, and start walking. Now, looking back, I have wondered many times why I did this. And I think I know. I think what I was doing was that I was certain that I knew every corner and step in my house, and so I wanted to test it to prove that I was right. I do have this whole house memorized. So through the kitchen, I would go into the hall, walk past the banister, making sure I didn't fall down the stairs. And if I wanted to really take a risk, I would head down into the basement, testing out each step, knowing that that last one was a bit shorter than all the rest. I did this all the time. Walked through my house as a child with my eyes closed. I was certain that I had it all memorized, and I would even give myself double points in this little game if I didn't have to touch any walls. Double points. Now, invariably, you can imagine there were some close calls because I did not have the house memorized like I thought I did. I would forget, was it 8 steps or 9 steps to the landing, and just found out. Or I would think, well, I think I'm only about halfway through the living room, and no, I was all the way through. No matter how many times I did my little experiment, I never did memorize the house completely. As much as I thought I could get through it blind, I couldn't. Now, I bring up my childhood neuroses because Jesus thought a lot about blindness. We know he thought a lot about blindness because all we have to do is look through the scriptures, and he is constantly healing someone of blindness, speaking about blindness, asking his disciples if they're being willfully blind. Jesus thought a lot about blindness. He even states that it's one of the reasons he came into the world. He announces it at the beginning of his ministry when he goes to the synagogue and he reads Isaiah's prophecy, the one I read for you this morning. That's why it probably sounds familiar to you. Because when Jesus began his ministry, he unrolled the scroll and he read those words from Isaiah. He said, "The Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to recover the sight of the blind." And then Luke tells us he rolled up the scroll and he looked at the congregation and he said, "This prophecy has come true before your eyes today." And then there was quite a bit of consternation in the congregation as they tried to understand what he was saying. But what's so interesting about that Isaiah passage is that Jesus doesn't just quote it, he adds to it. Because I just read it for you, and you know this. Isaiah does mention that the day the Lord comes, there's release to the captive, and there's good news to the oppressed, but Isaiah doesn't say anything about those who can't see. But Jesus does. He adds it in. He adds to it. He says, "The Lord has also anointed me to recover the sight of the blind." Jesus cares about blindness, helping us recover from it. It's one of the reasons he came into this world. It's a core part of his ministry, and it is a core part because he knew that so many of us were walking around with our eyes closed. Many of the religious people that Jesus meets are sure they've got their faith figured out, that they've got God memorized down to every last corner and turn of him. There's nothing they have missed and nothing more they need to learn, and Jesus wants to pry their eyes open and help them see. We have been reading through Luke's gospel this summer, and it is one way to look at the entire gospel, that's what Jesus is doing throughout. He is trying to make people see. He tells parables and he offers lessons, all so that they will see. He teaches and he preaches and he heals, all to open people's eyes and show them that they do not yet know everything about God. We have spent our summer hearing his efforts, and now in this last chapter, right before Jesus enters Jerusalem for the last time, this last chapter he tries one more time. He says to his disciples, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be mocked and insulted and spat upon and whipped and killed, and on the third day he will rise again." We can guess what he's trying to show them. Can't we? Can we guess what he's trying to show them? We know what they are blind to because of the 6 things that Jesus says will happen to him in Jerusalem. 5 of them are horrible. And he didn't have to tell it that way. He could have said, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be killed, but he will rise, and the stone will be rolled away, and angels will speak, and the bodily form will be visible, and the Son of Man will ascend into heaven." He could have said all of that, and he didn't. He didn't because his friends were not blind to the resurrection. They could fit that into their house of faith. What they couldn't take in, what they refused to see, was that Jesus would suffer. That God's only Son, the first and the last, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, would be in pain. So he draws them the picture. 5 horrible images he shows to make his message clear, to help them see. He will be mocked and insulted by people. They will spit on him and whip him, and he will be killed. and they just can't see it. He wants them to see, but their eyes remain closed because they already know everything about God. They already know how God works and who he is. That's what they believe. And the idea that God would know weakness is unthinkable, and the idea that God could suffer is unbearable. Not much has changed in a couple thousand years. We do not want to see. It is too hard. A literal, tangible sign of this can be seen, and it's a very popular in Christian churches right now, in the United States especially, to take down their crosses and to put up instead something warmer and friendlier, like hearts, or a symbol of the earth or of the sun. And that's all right. That's all right. There are many symbols of the Christian faith. There does not have to be a cross in every single room. But if we take the cross out of the message, then we are shutting our eyes to what Jesus wants to show us. We are shutting our eyes. When we rush in our Holy Weeks from the Palms processional to Easter with nothing in between, we do the same. Or when we think about Jesus as this superhero figure for whom mere mortality doesn't matter, then we are walking blind. We're walking through that house blind. Double points if we don't touch the walls. Because it really is true that all children go through the phase when they want to have their eyes shut. But Jesus came to recover the blind. He wants you to see this truth. He repeats it in 5 ways. He wants you to see that suffering is not outside of God. Your suffering, pain, or weakness, it is not beyond him. It's not a failure, and it's not a sin. It's something each of us faces. And depending on how we face it, we can become more and more like Jesus. We can better know him every corner and better every step because he is going to Jerusalem. He is. He will not sidestep it. He will not skip the hard parts. He has to. He is going to Jerusalem. And it doesn't make him weaker to do this. It makes him stronger. Don't you see what he is showing us? The Son of Man will be mocked and spit upon and whipped and killed. Don't you see? It makes him stronger. His closest friends didn't see. And as I read for you, just after they are blind to what he is trying to show them, just after that, Jesus heals a blind stranger right in front of their eyes, not to taunt his friends, not to judge them, but as a promise to them of what he can do for them, what he will do for them. He will recover their sight. We don't have to walk in the darkness of our own shut-eyed making. We don't have to be in that dark place alone. As hard as it is to consider that God in Jesus suffered, or that God in Jesus has been weak, has died, it is a wonderful gift for anyone who's in the dark. Like all those times when I walked through my house blind, I will tell you it always began with bravado. And the bravado quickly faded, which it usually does in the dark. And throughout my journeys, noises that would not have bothered me at all made me jump and jarred me. I would invariably get myself turned around, and what started as a silly game meant that everything was harder than it needed to be. That is what willful blindness does. It closes us off. It closes us off to what is right in front of us, and it makes every corner and every turn even more difficult. Every suffering is worse with willful blindness. It also closes us off to who is right in front of us, convincing us that we have to walk these steps alone, that we are the only ones in the darkness. But Jesus came to recover sight for the blind. So open your eyes and see. Open your eyes, because we children, we do love to play blind, don't we? But if we will open our eyes, we will see that he is in the darkness. He got there before you, in fact. For he had to go to Jerusalem. Can't you see? For you, he had to. Amen.